Texas A&M going on the road to Williams-Brice Stadium. They're facing off against the Gamecocks. 3.5-point favorites are the Texas A&M Aggies. Over/under set at 46.5. Texas A&M is 9-1 in the last 10 in this series, Mason. Or I think it's really the only 10 in this series, but I digress. 9-1. They've won 9 out of the last 10. The last win for South Carolina coming 2 years ago at Williams-Brice, where they were able to win that one 30-24. Texas A&M won last year 30-17 at Kyle Field. Let's start off with kind of South Carolina. The defense has been really good for South Carolina this season. I mean, there's really no other way to put it. 37th against the pass. That's formidable for sure. And I believe that teams, maybe I'm wrong on this, you all let me know in the comment section. If you're picking your poison, that's probably the poison you'd want to pick with this South Carolina defense is let's attack the secondary. So I think those are pretty good numbers. 37th in the country whenever I feel like that's the poison you'd want to pick with them and the thing that people would want to attack. That's pretty solid. 16th against the run, which is why you'd want to try to pass against this defensive line. Very, very good. Especially on the ends. The ends provide a ton of pressure on this defensive line for South Carolina. They've got 28 sacks this season. That's third in the nation. Crazy amount of sacks for South Carolina this year. Very, very good at getting after the quarterback. South Carolina offense, however, has been inconsistent and at times just downright bad. I think the offensive line, it's been really inconsistent, and the way I can explain it is I just think the offensive line is not that great, man. We've seen them even against teams like, I believe it was Citadel earlier in the year, couldn't block the defensive line. I mean, there's just been games where things just weren't working offensively, and that's really been what's hindered this South Carolina team so far this season. And played some pretty decent teams as well this season and hung with them, but just the offense just hadn't been quite good enough. 64th rushing offense, 108th passing offense, and they're not explosive at all, man. Only 89 plays this season from scrimmage of 10-plus yards. That's 114th in the country. They are the definition of not an explosive offense at this point. So going to have to be able to generate something, obviously, offensively against Texas A&M, who seems to have found a spark offensively themselves. We're going to talk about that here in a second. We're going to talk about that right now. Marcel Reed comes in second half of this past week's game against LSU. Very clearly provided a spark. Team went down from 17-7. They were down at halftime to winning the ball game, 30 whatever to 23. It was 36-23, something like that. Totally changed the momentum in the football game and may have changed the momentum for this offense going forward. We're going to have to see. I didn't go and look up a bunch of stats for Texas A&M's offense because it wouldn't really do us any service. This offense looks totally different this past Saturday than what it did in week 2, week 3, week 1. So going back and looking at those stats, I don't think has a whole lot to do with anything with this matchup. I mean, I feel like we need to look at what we've seen the last couple of weeks, and that's a hell of a run game from Texas A&M, and that's really the key to all their success, Mason. I mean, it's very, very clear. Le'Veon Moss, Amari Daniels, those guys, that's the key to stopping this offense or this offense taking off. Their ability to be efficient, and, I mean, they were just absolutely hungry hippo picking up those yards this past week. But let me say this. LSU, while they have been improved in 2024, if you look at their stats, they're in the bottom of the SEC defensively as far as yards given up and things like that. They've created some havoc. Blake Baker has done a good job putting guys in position. I felt like they've gotten better this year defensively. But I think we saw this past weekend, you can run on LSU. You can move the ball on LSU as long as you can do it mistake-free. You're going to have some success and protect your quarterback. South Carolina's not going to be so easy to give up those yards to this offense, Mason. So that's something that I really want to concentrate on this week for sure. Noah Thomas, that's a guy to watch out for at this point. I think that's kind of the downfield threat. Seems like he's really developing and coming into his own for Texas A&M. The defense for Texas A&M, really, really good. especially against the run. 18th in the country rush defense. I was a little surprised to see, but it is something that I've preached all year, so I kind of knew it in the back of my head. But 93rd in the country as far as pass defense, and 81st in the country in opponents' long scrimmage plays given up, and that's plays of 10 plus yards from scrimmage. They've given up 105 of them, and that's 81st in the country. So whereas this Texas A&M defense has been really good on the front, um, and they've gotten 19 sacks, 57 tackles for loss. That's 36th and 11th in the country. So that kind of furthers my point. They've been really good on the front end, and if teams were able to protect their quarterback, they've been able to have some success in the back end. Now we saw Texas A&M's defense be able to get turnovers this past week against LSU, and that's obviously an outlier. You can't predict turnovers, but obviously, if Texas A&M was able to get some of those this week, then I think that would be a big deal. And I think they've got an opportunity to, as South Carolina has been mistake prone on offense for sure. Um, Here's the biggest question for me. I know Texas A&M is the better team, right? I think Texas A&M is just as good, maybe a tick behind as far as defensively versus South Carolina, right? I think they're just as good, or maybe a tick behind in the secondary. And I think this offense for Texas A&M has the way they've been playing is much better than South Carolina's. But after coming off of an emotional victory, how do you handle that success, Mason? Texas A&M isn't a team that's just won 12 games a year every single year, and they just culture wise they just know how to go on the road and win games. And if you look back at Texas A&M this season, almost all their big successes and their the good parts of what they've done have been at home. Now you've got to go on the road, and it doesn't matter if South Carolina is 0-6, 0-10, 0-15. Those knucklehead Gamecock fans are going to be out there screaming for their Gamecocks, bud, and it's going to be a loud atmosphere. So I'm interested to see how Texas A&M is able to respond and to the wins, the emotional wins that they've gotten this season, and now you got to go on the road. And how was that offensive line going to respond to that South Carolina defensive front? I think that that's really important. I got Texas A&M winning this thing 24-21 over South Carolina. I think this is a 3-point victory all day. I think Vegas is all over the spread on this one. It doesn't look like there's a whole lot of room for me to get a bet in here. What are your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, well, I think built into the spread is the fact that South Carolina has been so good at forcing turnovers and creating sacks. You know, they're third in the country in sacks, averaging 4 per game, and they're 12th in the country in interceptions, averaging 1.4 per game. 34th in the country in fumbles, averaging just under 1 per game. So to me, it's and Shane Beamer just throughout his career has relied on what we call Beamer ball, right? And that is creating these turnovers, getting special teams involved. To me, that's the path to victory for South Carolina is can they force turnovers, because their offense has proven time and time again that they just have no ability to move the football. South Carolina cannot really pass the football very well at all. They're at 107th in the country in passing yards per game at just 186 per game. They are, but and then on top of that, when you look at what they give up in sacks, they're 133rd in the country, giving up 4.6 sacks per game.
Yeah.
That does not bode well for this offense, and plays right into the hand of the defensive line for Texas A&M. I think that they are absolutely going to eat in this one, especially if South Carolina tries to go out and pass the football. But they look as bad as they've been on offense, and even in running the football, they're averaging 3.7 yards per rush, which is 103rd in the country, but they're stubborn as all get out. They continue to try to run the football. They're 7th in the country, averaging 44 rush attempts per game. That's a lot of running the football when you're averaging 3.7 yards per attempt there. Um, but everything that South Carolina quote unquote can do offensively plays right into the hand of Texas A&M. You know, you mentioned the back end of the defense being sort of the weak spot, I guess you could say, for Texas A&M. They looked pretty good in the second half against LSU, mind you, but South Carolina is going to try to run the football. They're going to try to run it 40 times in this football game, and I think that the A&M defense is going to be able to step up. My only concern for A&M in this football game is, like I said, the turnovers, right? The secondary for South Carolina has been really good as of late, as teams kind of realize that if you're going to beat South Carolina, it's probably going to be through the air on the back end of the defense. Well, we've seen them come up with a few really stellar picks against Alabama, against Oklahoma, obviously with the a pick six and a scoop and score as well. The defense has been
Mm-hmm.
able to play Beamer ball and get the turnovers and score on defense and special teams. If Marcel Reed is the starter here, can he protect the football like Connor Wegman has been able to all season long? That's a bit of a question for me. When you look at the interceptions that they've thrown, they're averaging half an interception per game, which is really good. That's 19th in the country. They're 20th in the country in fumbles. Only fumbling the ball once every 5 games. That's really good. Can they continue to protect the football in this football game against South Carolina? Because to me, that's the only way that South Carolina climbs back into this football game. I think Texas A&M is going to be able to win this football game. I do have them covering. I think this is going to be a best bet for me this week, as I just feel like Texas A&M has a ton of momentum. I don't think that they're overlooking the Gamecocks in Columbia this week. I think that a Mike Elko coached Texas A&M football team is going to be prepared, and I think that they win by a touchdown this week.